Welcome to today's video. Today we're diving into a tragic and chilling story that took place in the seemingly peaceful town of Pocatello, Idaho. This is the story of Cassie Jo Stoddard, a young girl whose life was senselessly taken on a dark day in September 2006. A story that serves as a powerful reminder of how thin the line can be between normality and unimaginable darkness. On September 22, 2006, 16-year-old Cassie Jo Stoddard was asked to house sit for her aunt and uncle, the Contreras family, while they were out of town for the weekend. It was a simple task: look after the house and the family pets. Cassie was known for being responsible, which is why her family trusted her. She had no way of knowing that this weekend would be her last. That evening, Cassie's boyfriend, Matt Beckham, came over to watch a movie with her. Everything seemed perfectly normal, just another peaceful evening in a quiet town. But later that night, two of Cassie's acquaintances, Adamczyk and Draper, also showed up. At first glance, their visit appeared casual, but underneath the surface, something far more sinister was brewing. Tori and Brian hung out with Cassie and Matt for a while, watching a movie together. However, they eventually said their goodbyes and left. Matt stayed for a bit longer but had to leave as well. Cassie, being responsible, insisted on staying at the house to fulfill her duties, despite the offer to leave with Matt. No one could have predicted that this decision would be fateful. Unbeknownst to Cassie, Tori and Brian had only pretended to leave. The two boys, who had been harboring dark fantasies for some time, had other plans. Obsessed with horror movies, particularly the Scream franchise, they had concocted a terrifying plan to turn their twisted fantasies into reality. And tragically, Cassie had been chosen as their victim. After Matt left, Tori and Brian returned to the house, dressed in black, wearing masks, and armed with knives. Their idea was to mimic the horror movie scenarios they admired. They turned off the electricity in the house, hoping to scare Cassie into coming down to the basement, but she didn't fall into their trap. Instead, she stayed in the living room, trying to deal with the unsettling situation. When their initial plan didn't work, the two intruders entered the house through the garage. They found Cassie asleep on the couch and launched their brutal attack. Cassie tried to defend herself, but the assault was vicious and relentless. She was stabbed over 30 times in what can only be described as a senseless and horrifying act of violence. The next day, September 24, 2006, Cassie's family returned home to discover the horrifying scene. Her cousin Kelsey, the first to enter, found Cassie's body. The family was devastated, and they immediately called the police. First responders confirmed what everyone feared: Cassie had been brutally murdered. The investigation into Cassie's death began right away. At first, there were few leads. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing seemed to have been stolen. The theory of a robbery was quickly ruled out. However, Matt, Cassie's boyfriend, provided the investigators with a crucial lead. He mentioned that Tori and Brian had been at the house that night. When the police questioned Tori and Brian, the boys claimed they had been at the movies. The alibi seemed solid at first, but upon further investigation, it fell apart. Cinema staff confirmed that the boys had bought tickets, but they hadn't stayed for the film. This was the first indication that their story didn't add up. After several rounds of interrogation, Brian broke under pressure. He confessed to the crime but tried to shift most of the blame onto Tori. He even led investigators to the location where they had buried the evidence: the knives, masks, gloves, and a tape recording of their twisted plan. The recorded footage revealed their chilling conversations before and after the murder, including how they had meticulously planned every detail and how they relished the idea of committing a horrific crime. This video evidence would become a key piece of the investigation. In the recordings, the boys expressed no remorse. Instead, they discussed their excitement about the crime, with Tori even comparing his feelings to being overwhelmed by emotions, while Brian spoke about wanting to surpass infamous criminals like Ted Bundy and the Zodiac Killer. They imagined their case would be studied by future generations, and they saw themselves as masterminds of a terrible, dark legacy. On September 27, 2006, just a few days after Cassie's murder, Tori Adamczyk and Brian Draper were arrested. At their trial, both boys attempted to shift the blame onto each other, but the evidence was clear. The videotapes, their recorded confessions, and the physical evidence left no doubt that both had played a direct role in this senseless. Ultimately, the court found Tori and Brian guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case sent shockwaves through not just Pocatello, but the entire state of Idaho and beyond. This story is heartbreaking not just because of the brutal nature of the crime, but because of how utterly senseless it was. Two young men, driven by dark fantasies and a twisted desire for fame, took the life of an innocent girl. They hid their dangerous intentions behind a facade of normalcy, showing how little we sometimes know about the people around us. Psychologists involved in the case analyzed Tori and Brian's psychological state and noted several troubling characteristics they shared. Both boys displayed a lack of empathy, an obsession with being the center of attention, and a sense of superiority over others. For them, the act of murder wasn't just about violence, but about making a name for themselves. Brian Draper, in particular, was fascinated with notorious criminals and wanted to go down in history as someone who had outdone his twisted idols. The tapes the boys recorded provided a chilling insight into their mindset. In those recordings, they joked about their plans and reveled in the idea of committing murder, all without showing a shred of remorse. Their speech was calculated, cold, and detached from the gravity of what they were about to do. For Cassie's family, the trial was an unimaginable ordeal. Her mother, Anna Stoddard, tearfully described Cassie as a bright, kind, and responsible girl with her whole future ahead of her. The pain of losing her in such a horrific way was overwhelming for everyone who knew her. The trial garnered significant media attention, with many people struggling to understand how two seemingly normal teenagers could commit such a heinous crime. Defense lawyers argued that the boys had influenced each other, but the evidence was irrefutable. In the end, this tragic story serves as a sobering reminder that even in the most peaceful communities, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. Tori Adamczyk and Brian Draper seemed like ordinary teenagers, but their deep inner turmoil and warped fantasies led them down a path of destruction. This case also raises important questions. Could the warning signs have been noticed earlier? Could something have been done to prevent this? While we may never have all the answers, Cassie's story reminds us to stay vigilant about the people around us and the hidden struggles they may be facing. As we conclude, let us remember Cassie Jo Stoddard, not for the tragedy that took her life, but for the bright and responsible young girl she was. Her story should remind us all of the importance of compassion, understanding, and paying attention to those who may be hiding dangerous intentions behind a mask of normalcy.